Arthur, it's so great to sit here with you and chat a little bit about all the exciting things you have coming up.
Thank you, Montse. Nice to be with you, and great to be with EWTN.
Yeah, this is new for us.
Yeah.
It's exciting, and
Yeah, no, it's
especially
wonderful.
on News in Depth. So
Uh-huh.
we speak about what's really in our hearts. We talk about what's going on in the world and try to break it down for our audience. There's this one thing that I think is particularly interesting, the idea of masculinity.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Getting all controversial right from the get-go.
Right from the get-go, right from the start. It's what they expect.
Yeah.
And you see it in different ways.
Yeah.
You've got Jordan Peterson, who takes it in one direction. You have priests who are lifting weights, Father Capo in Miami, and you have the Barbie movie with Ken blaming Barbie, saying you've failed me, trying to define himself as a man. What roadmap do you have in discussions around masculinity, especially as a Catholic man?
You know, there's a million different ways to be a good man, but the whole point is that you need to be a good man. That's what it comes down to. And you know, the fact is there's a lot more interest that's actually coming in all different communities, and taking care of your body and being in shape, being a respectable person. And you know, this is trying to distinguish masculinity from what would be toxic masculinity. And I understand in the modern culture there's a way of talking about that, which is sort of any masculinity is toxic. But the truth is that we as Catholics understand that masculinity can be toxic when it's taken to the point that it helps us, it makes us think that somehow men are better than women, or that it's something that we should be focusing on in denigrating women themselves or putting ourselves in front of women. And that's not the way it's supposed to work at all. On the contrary, we're supposed to love the way that God made us, and we're supposed to take care of our temple, take care of our bodies, and integrate that with our soul. And I think it's great that I would like to see a new Catholic movement of fitness and health, quite frankly, because this is one of the ways that we can honor and love our Lord.
What do you think about the way that men should consider religion? Is religion part of true masculinity as well?
Yeah, here's an interesting thing that actually, I'm a social scientist, so one of the things that I see is that, you know, I'm looking at the predictors of whether or not your kids are going to grow up and practice the faith. Any faith, but I care most about the Catholic faith, obviously. What's the biggest predictor in growing up to be a Catholic? You can look at where you grow up and what your parents say and how much money you have and how much education and all that stuff sort of falls out of the models. And number one, for two-parent families at least, is whether you saw your father practicing his faith. This is the number one predictor. Now, probably what this means is that when you're a little kid, the most powerful, physically powerful person that you see in your life kneeling before God has a huge impression on you. When I was a kid, my dad, I remember asking my older brother Jeff, do you think Dad could lift the house? Because he was the most powerful creature that I'd ever, laid eyes on. And my dad bowed his knee to no man, but he was on his knees on Sunday morning. No joke. And that has a huge impact. And that's a manly thing. Are you manly enough to bow down before the Lord? And are you manly enough to bow down before the Lord in front of the people over whom you have total responsibility? Because that is an ultimate witness. That is an ultimate witness of weakening yourself as a strong person in the time where it truly matters. That's, as far as I'm concerned, this is the ultimate Catholic manliness.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I know that's the idea of being vulnerable in that way is something a lot of people are scared of.
Right.
You talked about this during the pandemic at a speech with the Catholic Information Center. You said that men should be courageous. Go and ask that girl to date you. Go and do the things that make you uncomfortable. Why did you say that?
Well, part of it is that fear and love are opposites. Through love, there is no fear. According to St. John the Apostle, perfect love drives out fear is the whole idea. And this is actually a neuroscientific, but also a psychological truth that our brains can't process fear and love simultaneously. That love is the ultimate positive emotion, and fear is the master negative emotion. And so one of the problems that we have in our society is there's not enough love. I mean, we witness this around us all the time through political polarization, the way that we deal with each other, the fact that people are getting less and less happy and more fearful and lacking in love. Well, this is no coincidence. The fear that we have in our society is driving love away. And so the result of that is that if you want more love in your life, you need to deal with the fear. And the way that you deal with your fear is head on, is by looking that fear in the eye and stepping into it, having the courage to actually not have fear, but to deal with fear in a way. And what that will do is invite love into your life. The classic case is, I know I talk to people in their 20s a lot. I'm a college professor, and my graduate students are in their late 20s, typically. And a lot of them have never dated. They've actually,
they're in their late 20s and they've never dated.
They've never dated, and it's because they're afraid of failing in this way, and that failure is crowding out their love. So I say you got to step into the zone, feel the fear, act anyway, ask her out. You might get shot down, but you won't die.
It's a nice comparison. Ask her out or die.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Happiness, though, you mentioned happiness, finding that fulfillment because you're courageous, etc. Going there. You have a happiness podcast with Hallow as well, but also that is the theme. You have a book on happiness.
Right.
Well, you have many books.
Yeah. I teach the science of happiness.
That's right, at Harvard.
Right.
Why happiness?
Happiness is what we all want, and ultimately, you know, what I found. I mean, I'm not working as a Catholic missionary, but we're all Catholic missionaries. You know, at the end of the day, we're supposed to sanctify our work and lift people up through our work, and to introduce people to the beauty of the Catholic faith. I do it by creating a hunger in people for what they really want, which is to be happier people. The source of that happiness in my life is my faith, and when people see that, they want more of it. So I think I can. Even people who don't ultimately become Catholic, I can enrich them, which I think God wants me to do, and then some of them are actually going to look behind the curtain. What's going on? What's animating Brooks in this work that he's actually pursuing? And they'll see my Catholic faith, because it is no secret. I mean, they know how to use Google. Not to mention the fact that each of the 175 speeches I give each year, I make sure that no one leaves ever from any one speech not knowing that my Catholic faith is the most important part of my life. When I can link up the happiness, the bliss that actually is the center of, you know, what I've been looking for with the faith, which is how I found it, they're not dumb. They can put two and two together, and maybe it works in their life too.
Yeah, they get to ask the question, what does he have that I don't? And maybe say, I want that.
What's working for him that might work for me? Oh, it's just a joy.
That's beautiful. When you talk about happiness, there is that paradigm of the overwhelming political reality that we live in today.
Right.
And I went back and I read a book that you wrote in 2019, Love Your Enemies. And I think it's a beautiful proposition. It's the Christian proposition on how to have dialogue, discussion. If you want to talk about it in Catholic terms right now, the buzzword is synodality.
Yeah.
What is it that we're missing in order to actually apply what you were talking about in 2019?
You know, working with students and young people and people active in politics and on the right and the left, one of the great lies that we have in our society today is to be transgressive, to be radical. You got to hate more. You got to hate your enemies more. There is nothing more traditional, conventional, boring than hating your enemies. It's the easiest thing that anybody can possibly do, and yet that's what we're telling young people. Why? Because, you know, baby boomers are fighting some culture war, and they're conscripting child soldiers into it by telling them to hate their enemies. The real transgression, the really radical teaching, if you want to be subversive, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. That is the most radical teaching that can truly transform anybody's life and our society. And once we go onto that path, wow, boy, that'll make you some enemies, by the way, that you'll have plenty of opportunities to love.
Spend more time on your knees praying for your enemies. You talked about your Catholic identity. You don't hide it. It's really important to you. And yet, your partners in crime are Oprah Winfrey and the Dalai Lama. Explain that to me. Oh,
I've been so lucky. You know, since I've been teaching at Harvard and writing for The Atlantic, I've been able to work with so many interesting people. I have a book coming out in September with Oprah Winfrey. We've been working together on various projects. So she started reading my column during the pandemic, and then read my latest book, which came out in 2022, called From Strength to Strength, and asked me to be on her podcast. And I did a television show with her, and we were just like a house on fire. And part of the reason is because she really wants to lift people up and bring them together. She wants to empower people to create more happiness in their own lives and more happiness in the lives of other people, and that's what I want too. But we come at it from different angles, because she's in mass media and I work in the world of research. And she had this idea. She said, why don't we team up? Why don't we write a book for different kinds of audiences where we collaborate on what the message is? And I thought, Oprah Winfrey just asked me to write a book with her.
Yeah, she came to you. That's beautiful.
It was wonderful. And so, you know, we cooked it up in her tea house in Montecito, California, and then we went back and wrote parts and sent them back and forth to each other. It's coming out in September. I'm really happy with it.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it. I think that's really going to be an explosive way for you to reach into the secular world in a way that other Catholics are either fearful of doing or don't know how, or might not have the connections, the circumstance.
Well, you know, the truth is that Catholic life is missionary life. And part of the reason is because we're walking around, you can go certain places where every single person that you meet is already a practicing Catholic, but that's not my mission. I'm not uniformed military. I'm a spy in plain sight. I need to walk around and live my faith because I'm in the mission field, and I have to find better ways to get more deeply into the mission field. Why? Because I want to lift people up. I want people to feel this. I mean, more souls to heaven. it's just the best possible vocation that we can have, and doing it with our ordinary work, doing things that we love. What you're doing here on EWTN, what a joy it is, to be sure.
Yes.
And I'm, I'm working in more secular institutions, but I get to talk about happiness, which people really, really want, and then introduce them to the spiritual source of their well-being, and it's great.
It's beautiful when you can communicate the truth in that way, because you
Yeah.
know the truth.
Yeah.
You've received that great gift of faith.
Yeah.
And it's one, obviously, that your father modeled for you.
Yeah.
And not everyone has that opportunity.
No.
What do you say to the broken world where most people, 50% of marriages end in divorce? Most young people are growing up in families that are not two-parent families,
Right.
or are parented by families that are non-traditional. What can you say to them? What do you offer to them?
Well, to begin with, there's a lot to regret in the world, because there's a lot of problems in the world, but there's nothing new about that. I mean, the world has always been fallen, the world has always been broken, and the ultimate witness that we have is the joy in our lives and the way that we live our lives, is to be a living witness, and not to walk around glumly and angrily and throw bombs and insults and just fall prey to the way the secular world is hating their enemies, but rather to hold ourselves in a way that's dignified of what joyful Catholics should be doing. And by the way, when we do that, when we live in that way, we're happier. And so it's a win-win. Be the happy Catholic that you are. Let people witness that, and that in and of itself is a balm of Gilead.
Yeah.
For what the world needs right now. Be I don't know who said this, Michelle Obama. Be the solution to the problem. Be the
Yeah.
witness.
Yeah.
Be the hope. We can actually do that by just living our faith.
Well, I'm not going to let you off the hook on the Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
Because he said something to you about your wife that I think is beautiful. What did he say to you?
Well, so I've been working with the Dalai Lama for about 11 years, and we're working on a book project together, as a matter of fact. And the Dalai Lama told me that my wife is my spiritual director, my leader, my guru. And it's really true. It's funny, there's an old Irish saying that dad gets the family into church, but mom gets the family into heaven. And when my kids were little, I was the one yelling, "Get in the car! I don't care if you're not wearing shoes." But ultimately, the one who was getting us all into heaven, the witness to, the hope and the ministry of our Lord, lived out day after day after day after day, was my wife. And on my worst days, she makes me a better man.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, I'm so grateful for your time, and I look forward to having you on EWTN a couple more times.
Thank you, Montse.
Thank you so much, Arthur.